Hello and welcome to the Love, Creativity, Justice podcast. This episode, we are joined by Phillip Attmore. Phillip has been dancing, singing, and acting since the age of 3. Having worked in multiple Broadway shows, film, television, and commercials, he has shared the stage and screen with legends in such shows as Hello Dolly, Irving Berlin's White Christmas, Spam-A-Lot, and The Marvelous Miss Maisel. In addition, Phillip Attmore has traveled all over the world working as an actor, singer, dancer, writer, director, choreographer, spoken word artist, and speaker.
All right, welcome to everyone to the Love, Creativity, Justice podcast. My name is Caleb. I'm part of the creative team here at the church. And today we are joined by Phillip Attmore.
Hello, hello.
So welcome. I'm so excited that you're here. I'm so excited for the conversation. I feel like I say that every time, but it's true. Each friend really that I get the chance to kind of interview and discuss things with, it's truly an honor. I really don't take that for granted because I know I am going to learn a lot throughout this whole process. I think I said it in Sarah Caleb's podcast. Like, it really does feel like a selfish podcast a little bit, where I just get to talk to my friends about these things. But first off, I think where this conversation really started, and why I think we're sitting here today, is a few weeks ago, I think, on a Sunday, you and I connected for, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 minutes at the end of a service. And just really poured our hearts out to each other in that moment. It wasn't necessary. I mean, it started with a hug, and then it evolved from there.
And I was a puddle on the floor.
Right. Really just sharing where we were at. And I'm curious, like in our past conversation, we were both in a very similar place of reconciling what it means to lay down our dreams and hold those dreams in contention with what is going on in our lives and where we feel God is calling us. And I'm curious, are you kind of still in that same space, in that same place since we last talked about it?
Yes, it's a yes and I remember very clearly, I had just had a moment where Joy and I actually had gone to a funeral, and it was a friend of ours who was a nanny for a living and had actually worked with a lot of influential people in the entertainment industry and had raised their kids up, essentially. And she died way too young. But being at her funeral was a very interesting moment because here's this woman that most of the world doesn't know. She's not famous. Yet these people of influence are sitting there, not believers, and testifying of the ways that a God that they don't believe in showed up in their family. And they were bawling their eyes out. They were filled with so much love for this woman and her legacy and the undeniable fingerprint of God. And, when you go to a funeral, you walk out sort of in this place of, especially if it's a friend of yours that you loved and lived a life that was way bigger than, you could feel the significance of their life after they've gone. And so I was also obviously mourning, but also freshly inspired to think about, you're quite naturally thinking about like what your sense of purpose is, what your sense of significance is. Mortality does that.
What you've done.
What you've done, yeah. What would people
people
say at my funeral,
Yeah.
and all the things. And so it was a little bit of mourning, a little bit of celebrating her life, and then also a little bit of pondering like my own significance and what, God, what are you saying in this moment? And so I had been writing in my journal, and I thought, I remember feeling this sense of like, it was like a revelation of, I feel like I have been living half alive for a little bit now. It kind of comes from being a parent and figuring out, how to, as you're continuing into adulthood and continuing to pursue your career and life and family, but your kids are growing older. When they're young, there is a sense of like, you can't not sacrifice. So I was like, I've been feeling half alive. Oh, I know. I am going to dedicate this year to living life to the fullest. I'm going to live a full life. And later on in the day, I just felt this sort of gentle whisper, but it was a little bit of a juxtaposition because I felt God say, or you could just die to yourself.
I love, oh my gosh. I love that it wasn't like a week later. It wasn't a month later. It was the same day.
And I was like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, sounds good.
Sounds
God.
good. But it was also a beautiful moment because I had realized that in this place of feeling half alive, one of the reasons why I probably felt half alive is because I had been spending a lot of time pondering my own significance, which is very small in light of the call and the destiny that God has on my life, and just for everyone as well. When you think too much about yourself, you sort of pull yourself out of that place of being surrendered to God and being empty in a way where He can fully fill you with Himself and with His Spirit, and that happens naturally a lot of times. If you're in the entertainment industry, and you're a professed believer, you feel that tension all the time between, I'm doing this for God. I'm going to be a light in this industry, and then you realize after watching yourself for several hours on a self-tape that you just did that you have lost the plot.
Yeah.
So I just felt God say, you could just die. I was like, oh, cool.
Cool.
So that's the place that I was in.
Yeah.
And I think I've taken that on as a challenge in the sense that obviously to die in our faith means that you fully live, and discovering the benefits of being fully surrendered to Christ. I think that's the journey that I'm on in the midst of the process of figuring life out.
Yeah. Yeah, I do remember you saying that now. I'm curious. I want to go deeper into that, but something almost going backwards a little bit towards the inception, something that I've been thinking about a lot is like when that initial dream was incepted, or the desire or inward longing first grew and started to have breath within you. I was thinking about when like a child says when they're younger, I'm sure you can envision what like Freedom and Justice have now said. It's like, I want to be a firefighter, or I want to be a doctor, or I want to be whatever it is. That comes from such a place of just pure innocence of I see this thing and I think it's the coolest thing and that's all that I want to be. And if no one ever knows that I am that thing, but I am it, it doesn't matter. And then it slowly like twists and the desire of importance and worth and recognition and all of these things start to twist and get their fingers in there and mess with it. I'm curious, like back when you like think back to when the claws first gripped you of that dream, of that purpose, of that desire. What did that look like? What did that feel like for you?
It looked like me dancing in the backyard, with my tap shoes on nonstop. It looked like my watching Singing in the Rain over and over again, and clips of Gregory Hines dancing and singing, and listening to Sammy Davis Jr. over and over again. It just looked like my investing my time in my heroes, performers, song and dance men and women that I wanted to emulate when I was older. And it looked like my father, who's no longer with us, who would every 4th of July, as he was barbecuing, he would set up his old record player and all of his records of great jazz artists and blast them in the backyard as he was barbecuing. And all of those things stay with you as sort of passion formers, things that inspire you to go after it. And so I started dancing when I was 3 and singing and acting. I'm number 3 of 3 siblings, but I came 20 years after my brother and sister.
Oh, wow.
And we, all 3 of us, artistically inclined. My sister was a self-taught musician. My brother was in the Mickey Mouse Club in the 70s and a very successful child actor, actually. And so when I came along, my parents had this sneaking suspicion that because their other two kids were artistically inclined, that I might be. And so they just tested the waters. The first thing they did, they struck gold. They put me in tap classes, tap dancing lessons, and I just never looked back. And got an agent as a child, and did commercials, and went to dance competitions, and I ended up going to an arts high school in Los Angeles and a LA County High School for the Arts. And what I loved about that place was, and it had multiple departments: dance, theater, voice, and music, and visual arts, and loads of famous people have gone there. And but what I loved about training like that was that by the time you graduated, you knew whether it was just a passion, which hopefully the passion would stay with you regardless, or it was something that you absolutely had to pursue as a career. And that's what I ended up doing. So that's sort of what it looks like in terms of just passion growing within you and things starting as a dream and growing up with you.
Yeah, I think it's so fascinating when someone such as yourself, who started so early, so young, I definitely did not find. I remember there was a moment where I realized, probably when I was in early high school, maybe late middle school, early high school, watching Lord of the Rings movies, and I realized that, there are actual people making the movies. They don't just exist.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's kind of where that started for me. But being someone so young and growing up in that, did it feel natural to you? Did it just come, or was there at any point where you started to kind of question that even early on?
Yeah, I think that there's a famous book that I love called Intent to Live by Larry Moss, who's an amazing acting teacher. And in the book, he quotes Uta Hagen, and she says, "You have to have talent for your talent." It's not enough. So the context is that it's not enough to have raw talent. You have to have talent for your talent. So I do feel that even before I started discovering what it fully means to be an actor and a singer and a dancer and a performer, I do feel like there was a presence thing that I have always had.
Something innate.
Yeah, something innate for sure. That was bigger than needing attention. I've never felt like when I'm on stage that I've needed attention. It was more about coming alive. There's an aspect where I would get to express myself in a way beyond words. And I still feel that actually now as a performer. I still feel the beauty of discovering an aspect of myself once I step onto the stage or once I step behind the camera.
Yeah.
There's always something else that I discover, especially if it's new work or work that I've never performed before. And I do appreciate that aspect of being an artist, that the journey is never over and you're always in process. If you're really invested in the journey, it's not about the result. It's not even about the project you're working on. It's about the process that you're in, which means that you're committed to the goal, which is what you think things will turn out to be. And you're also committed to the hardship, the disappointment, and the things along the way that are in a way an obstacle to what you want or what you think you want. I always say that there's a difference between industry and artistry. In the entertainment industry, it is it's not always run by artists, and nor can it be if we really want to be honest in terms of like what it looks like to have a booming industry. You need people who think differently for sure. You need business people attached, but I do feel like that tension of being in an industry full of artists is how to never lose your sense of identity and your voice as a creative person in an industry that makes demands because you still have to sell something.
Right.
And that's the life of an artist. And that's particularly the life of an artist of faith, you know?
Well, okay, so let me ask you a potentially hard question that you might not know the answer to.
Probably not. Let's see.
I mean, we're talking about dying to yourself still.
Yeah.
What is the in your mind, what is the difference between like giving up and dying to yourself?
Ooh, that's a really, really good question.
Because I think they are close to each other, but not from the same tenet, not from the same heart.
Yeah. For sure. And I want to say this with, with all empathy as well, because I do believe that sometimes things just get hard and you really, really absolutely do want to quit. You really do want to give up. However, to give up is to betray your own history. To quit is to betray not only what you've invested in personally in your own journey, but also to give up on those who have invested in you and invested in your gift. Unless there's an authentic transition and you found life doing something else and you're perfectly happy with that, but only you know whether or not you're betraying your own history based on what you feel in your heart in terms of passion.
Yeah.
And I think, so between giving up and what was the...
Between giving up and dying to yourself.
Yes, and dying to yourself. I think that when it comes to, and this I can only sort of ponder on in the context of faith, right? I think there are times where we know that God has spoken about something, and then there are certain things that we just really, really want, and so we just keep going after it. And I'm not even talking about now going after opportunities, because the thing is sometimes there are moments where, you feel like God wants you to pursue this opportunity, and then there are other times where I it's just fun to see what comes at you and play and discover and see what sort of doors open up. And as an artist, it's fun to be surprised by the gifts that God gives through opportunity. But I'm going to speak specifically to moments where it becomes more when the doors that you don't necessarily, the doors that you're hoping would open don't open in the way that you expected. And then it becomes more about kicking down a door as opposed to...
That's the only way.
Yeah, and that's the only way. Then it becomes about ego.
Yeah.
And I think the moment that something becomes about ego, you get in the way of the very thing that you're wanting to communicate anyway. And so I believe that there are times where, as an artist, you feel ego arise. Maybe so. If you're an actor, and I've been in this place a few times where I'm even last year was an interesting year because I was up for like 3 major projects, and conversations like it's between you and another person, and unfortunately, it went the other way.
Yeah.
And you discover it's like a reality TV star or somebody who will put butts in seats and all the things, right? And so I have a choice in that moment to recognize that the world is big, God is big, and to celebrate that person, or compare myself and let entitlement and ego and all the things get in the way because that person occupied my position. And
that could have been me.
Yeah, that could have been me. And I think the moment that you start to compare yourself, you then open a door into eventually or unintentionally cursing the person that took what you think is your position. And then what are you even doing it for then? That's when it's time to die. Because what are you doing it for?
Yeah.
I remember one time, it was a gentle rebuke from God in the context of auditions and whatnot. And I began to compare myself with somebody, and I just felt God whisper to me, I love that person so much. And I felt him say, if you don't have love for that person, ask me. Just ask me for just one thing that I have for their life planned, and I will give it to you, and you cannot help but fall in love with them.
Yeah.
You know, if it's not about love, then we will lose our way. And that happens all the time in this industry. But that's what I'm so grateful for is that I don't have to live a compulsive lifestyle and beat myself up every time I have, let my ego get in the way. But I am rooted and established in love already because of what Jesus has done. And so I always find these moments of death as an opportunity to be reminded of who I'm already centered in and who lives in me. And then I'm refreshed in a love that's greater than me and my purpose for even being in the entertainment industry. And beyond that, my purpose in the church, because as a creative person, you're naturally walking out a prophetic lifestyle because of the conversations that you find yourself surrounded in. You're speaking beyond words a particular message, whether it's through film or dance or poetry or song. And so, I think in with regards to your question, the difference between dying to yourself and what was it?
Giving up.
And giving up is ego.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. I don't think what you said a little bit earlier, I don't think I've ever equated. It's not necessarily a hard problem, but putting those two things of viewing the person that gets the thing that you wanted, almost as, you could say they're your competitor.
Yeah.
But almost is this thing of like, we are called to love our enemies.
Yeah.
And so almost equating that to, you are fighting for the same position, but you are, even if they get it, you are called to love that person.
Totally.
You are called to care about that person.
Yeah.
And,
but isn't it interesting that our list of who we perceive to be our enemies is much longer than God's?
yeah.
Like in whatever sphere we find ourselves in, I think anybody that gets in my way, that we can.
That's the ego.
That's the ego speaking, and it's crazy how ruthless a puffed up ego can make you.
Yeah.
And so, a life not laid down and a life not put to death so that you might live is a life full of ego.
Yeah.
Regardless of what, whoever's listening, regardless of what you believe, the idea of dying to yourself, it has nothing to do with hyper-religiosity or, being some religious monk. It has to do with, Jesus says, there's no greater love than to lay down your life for your friends, which is what Christ did for us first. So there's nothing that he's asking us to do that he didn't do first, and he actually made a way for us because there's only one sacrifice. So
ego and identity, I think are also like hand in hand. One is the conflated version of the other. Knowing who you are, I think I've just been thinking a lot about in regards to my own art and the internet and the digital age that we are now in, and we find ourselves and people's, especially the younger generation's obsession with being relevant. Like, I think relevancy is one of the greatest, almost like poisons that is currently going around, a contagion that is going around, is people are scared of not mattering, of not being relevant anymore. I think that's a truly terrifying thing for a lot of people.
I agree with that.
Just that their voice is not heard. In a space, in a world where we now exist, where you can put whatever you want out on the internet, your opinion, and the fact that it is not seen or liked or commented on or cared I think is a truly terrifying thing. Yeah. But I do think that what it goes along with what you're saying is that is a conflation of, one, identity, but then into into that ego. Is there any times that you have found like yourself kind of caught up in ego, and then is that kind of what led you to this place? I'm curious, what was that of getting to this now place of like, I need to die. I need to die to myself. What did that really shake out to be?
Joy and I moved back to Los Angeles in April of 2022, mainly because I'm from here originally. I'm from Pasadena. We both really felt that it was right for her to take the job at Expression 58, which she's really thriving in. Mm-hmm. And this is a community that, we really have been connected to since the first decade of the 2000s. That sounds like a lot longer than it is. Since like 2007. We've been connected to Expression for a long time. And so it didn't feel like starting over. We really valued sort of raising our kids being rooted in community and loved the idea of being close to my family here in Los Angeles. But really, we're excited about, on the back end of a hard season in New York, not necessarily industry-wise, but because of COVID and we had a difficult church transition out of New York, we really felt like this was an opportunity to build again. Mm-hmm. And to build in community and to invest in a church that we know and that we love and be invested in by that. And so with that, comes the unique challenge, because a lot of my career has been in New York, of reconciling what it means to move to Los Angeles when I'm still being called for things in New York. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's where a lot of that came from. Now, the beautiful thing is that in a lot of the things that I was submitted for, I've sort of been in this place for Hello Dolly was the last Broadway show that I did that was ensemble. I have only, for the most part, done principal work since then. So my no is easy when it comes to what jobs to pursue, because my focus is not to take any job anyway. And my agents get that. They're great. It's a great team. But when it's something that I really want, I think that I've encountered a season where, even just in this last week, where I have been up for things that your flesh tells you were born for this.
Mm-hmm. Or you have to do
this.
You
must pursue this. You must. And who else is going to do it but you? Mm-hmm. And you fill yourself up with there's a space for confidence, and then there are the stories that you tell yourself for why no one else can occupy this position. Mm-hmm. And when you begin to lean in that direction, after you've been humbled and you realize that it's going to somebody else, and you camp there for too long, I think that there's a space where you have to step back and say, okay, well, I think I put way too much into this, not into the process of working hard as an actor to get it, but I gave too much of myself away. I think it's learning how to walk away when the door has closed, and maybe the door will open again in the future. But my job, and this is what I love about God, is He's constantly reminding me that, because there are lots of things that I have gotten, right? But it's never about the project. The project itself is a product that people will see. And yes, the message that you're helping tell through playing a specific role or whatever title you have in the production of that, there's a certain thing that people will experience. However, the process, God with us in the process, is the thing that I've always found that I find myself talking about. And I know this as somebody who works in the entertainment industry, that I've seen so many miracles and seen God love on so many people in such powerful ways in the process of something big I was attached to. Mm-hmm. And then how easily we forget when it's on to the next shiny object. And that's what we're conditioned to do. We're building. It's like one credit to the next.
Yeah.
But But I find myself, because you were saying, why then, how do we discover that it's time to pull back? Because you're losing yourself in it. And it's very easy to in an industry that is all about you.
Yeah.
It's all about you as the product. And I don't believe that this industry is all about me. I do firmly believe that, and one of my biggest passions, especially when it comes to church and industry, is that we live in a results-driven society. And whether it's industry or church, we're always trying to produce something. And so it becomes about the result. We want to speak like somebody, or we want to have a specific message that we want to talk about, or I want to be in that Broadway show.
Be on a certain platform.
Yeah, whatever the result is, we want that. And yet I really do believe that God is after the journey leading up to that result. And for me, it's about the creative process and worship being one and the same. When you talk about like creativity and faith, I believe that everything starts with an encounter, and then you listen for the voice of God, and then you respond creatively. And when you've encountered God, you've heard His voice, and you've responded. That is a journey in and of itself, to where you then have an expression. That's the thing that people see.
Yeah.
But the depth of it is how you've encountered God, how you've heard His voice, and how you've responded.
Yeah.
And we're addicted to the expression of something that's much holier than the expression itself, the journey with God.
Yeah.
And, so what I have to remember are times when I have gotten the thing that I wanted and what happened. And it was never about the thing that I wanted. One of my first big things that I was on was So You Think You Can Dance. And it was I had a huge sort of intro into season 6 of So You Think You Can Dance. They ended ended the very first episode with a 5-minute segment just on me. I'm going to Vegas, blah, blah, blah. and so, it was a great credit to have. The journey, though, was wild. It's, whether people remember, what happened on the show for me, the credit I walk away with and going, wow, that was crazy. And people say, oh, yeah, you were on So You Think You Can Dance. But when I was on So You Think You Can Dance, my father passed away at the same time. So it was this crazy juxtaposition.
Yeah.
And what was wild about that time, it marked me because to go from filming on stage and, in rehearsals with cameras in my face and turn on my reality TV personality, I was then going to the hospital to potentially say goodbye to my father for the last time, and then speak at his funeral, and then compete that same week, until I got kicked off the show like everyone, until there's one winner. And what that taught me was that intimacy with God is everything. There's, regardless of whatever project you're working on, there's always going to be juxtaposition because life isn't rosy. So you could be killing it in your industry and life is still happening. And so if you're not...
Or the other way around.
Or the other way, or life could be happening and you're not killing it at anything. And so you just feel like, well, who am I? And so for me, I go back to that season that really marked me because leading up to So You Think You Can Dance, I had already had a sense of journey with God and my dad. My dad, who had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, should have died 3 years earlier, but he got healed of pancreatic cancer. And this was when I was a part of a church that didn't necessarily champion healing from the platform, and yet it was literally a medical miracle. Yeah. Sir, we don't know what to say, but the tumor has, shrank in its tracks, and we can operate. And he lived 3 months, 2.5 years beyond a 3-month diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. And he happened to pass away just after celebrating 50 years of marriage with my mother while I was on So You Think You Can Dance. So yeah, there's this crazy juxtaposition of loss and success, and yet there's this personal history with God that I carried with me on the show, and that's what I cared more about than being on the show itself in light of what was happening.
Yeah.
And so yeah.
Yeah. So taking all of that
Yeah.
history, and I think it's so fascinating that sorrow and that death is so wrapped in your story, interwoven so tightly. And now we're talking about dying to yourself.
Yeah.
So where is death in the journey? Like, I know you're in it. I feel like we're both in it right now, and it's hard to see beyond the chapter that is currently being written.
Yeah. I think it's every day. And not in a morbid kind of a way, but the invitation to empty yourself so that God can fill you with something is every day. That's what I realize, is that if I wait until I have to die to myself again, I've waited too long. But like journeying with God, to me, especially being in an industry that is full of self, especially in the days where you don't feel enough, which will happen, you then have to like go on Instagram and put a post up that sort of projects the image that you'd like to feel, or, you just send a cryptic text so that someone will tell you how amazing you are. On those days, it's it's time to sit in silence and just empty yourself and allow God to fill you with his delight. And that's what, that's sort of part two, when I said yes and, where I was just sort of a puddle on the floor. I'd also just lost my brother, speaking of death, and, so there's been a lot of loss in this season, but I also feel that it's been a fresh reminder that the invitation to die is also the invitation to live. And I think that's something that I have been freshly reminded of. I was speaking last week on a Zoom conference, and just before, I didn't know what I was going to talk about. And so Psalm 27, one thing I desired of the Lord. And, it's basically talking about sitting in the presence of God. And but then I just had this question. I was like, well, God, what if I don't feel like it? Like, what does that even mean? Desire, that's such a strong word. What if I don't feel desire for you because life is just hard? And then, I felt, again, just this moment, just this gentle whisper of delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. There are times where we may not feel a huge desire for God or a huge desire for anything, really, and yet there is something that you can think about that's happened in life. If you're a believer, there's something that God has done in your life that at least makes you smile. And that's the place to begin, is a place of delight. Delight opens the door to gratitude, and gratitude opens the door to possibility, because you remember once again that at your lowest point, God can fill you with hope. God can fill you with dreams. And that is every day, because otherwise you will fill yourself with yourself. In those moments where it's an invitation to die to yourself, grander than the plans and purposes, I hear the whisper of a father, and that is real in those moments, because where does it come from? How suddenly can I have hope? The mystery of hope arising on the whisper of a God who loves me is profound. And we take that for granted, especially if we're in the church, and we're familiar with language. The fact that God speaks to us and he's with us is profound. And when I was processing the loss of my brother earlier in the summer, one of the things I felt God say to me, it was a quiet moment when music was playing and I was trying to worship, and I had this image suddenly of being enveloped in a big tear. And I felt God say in that moment, Jesus wept. I said, well, okay, great,
It's the shortest Bible verse.
Exactly. And I was like, great, I don't have to write anything down, And then I felt God say, my tears are powerful because they've fallen from eyes that fully see you. Why it matters that we yield to a process of dying to ourselves is that we get to remember that God sees us. Yeah. And he cares more about the things that we're celebrating, the things that the loss that we're processing. Wherever we are in life, he cares more about those things that we're walking through than we do.
Yeah. Can you say that again?
My tears are powerful because they have fallen from eyes that fully see you.
Yeah, that's powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so in those quiet moments, those moments where you have nothing to give and then God whispers love to you, the difference between staying in a place of death and yielding to death so that you can live is our ability to hear and receive from the voice of God.
I think what a beautiful picture too of death and rebirth. We're approaching Easter. We're talking about the resurrection of Christ. And almost an invitation into that same process, not to become a savior unto ourselves, but quite the opposite.
Yeah.
Almost partnering again with that childlikeness of that first inception of that dream and that desire and that love of whatever it is, whatever craft, whatever joy, whatever passion that you find yourself just enveloped by.
Yeah.
God-given. And I think that's such a beautiful painting of what God is actually asking. And also how beautiful to say, I focus so much on the God, you're not giving me this. You're not giving me what I want. The job, the career gain, the notoriety. But he's like, I care about you. I don't care about that.
Yeah.
I care about you and what you're going through and what's happening in your family and in your life and in your innermost being. That says so much more than just give me the commercial directing job.
Yeah.
When put in that context.
Well, and even Paul, talks about this, I'm paraphrasing, but we can't fully partake in the resurrection without the crucifixion. Understanding that sense of sacrifice and the death of Jesus, so we partake in that, and then we fully partake in the resurrection as well. And I had a dream one time where I was outside a big charismatic church, and there was a cross on the ground, and there were people lined up taking turns to lay down on the cross. And in the most sort of like awkwardly charismatic way, like soaking it up. Whoa, it's powerful. And then they get up and they'd leave, right? Just this is happening, and I'm watching this happen at the foot of the cross. And there was a leader, a very well-known leader, on the other side of the cross, and he looked up as these people are taking turns soaking up the glory of the cross or whatever, and then getting up and leaving. He asks the question, what does it mean to be a true prophet? And I remember at the end of the dream thinking like, so a few years later, I find myself reading about the crucifixion, and this wild imagery of Jesus being surrounded by 60 men before picking up the cross and going to Calvary. And I felt the Holy Spirit whisper to me, I wanted you to pick it up. I wanted you to pick it up. And I immediately think of the dream that I'd had a few years ago, and just that image of people soaking up the glory and the power of the cross, getting up and leaving, and the Holy Spirit saying, I wanted you to pick it up. Many people love the benefits of the cross. They love the power of the cross, but they do not want the weight of the cross. And, Jesus says it. If anyone wants to follow me, he must pick up his cross and follow me, or he is not worthy.
You have to take on the weight.
Yeah, and that's not to say that we're to be these sort of like self-punishing, morbid people who, because if we know the power and the glory of the cross, then his yoke is easy and his burden is light. Like we pick up the cross and we follow God, and it's a sacrifice, but our purpose is in that, in whatever way, shape, or form. And when I think of like the industry that I'm in, especially in the time that we're living in, people want authenticity, and a lot of times, I've grown up in I've been in a lot of church environments where people see worship as escapism. Mm-hmm. Whatever's happening in life, I'm just going to worship God, and, I'm just going to like go to heaven.
Check it at the door.
Check out. And yet the reality is, because we serve a God who's both human and God, the God who spoke on the Beatitudes, some of the most intense human experiences, from being hungry and thirsty, yet being that when we would engage in our hunger and thirst in the presence of God, we would be filled. Rejection, all of these things that he cites in the Beatitudes, he speaks from a place of understanding that when we commit to being fully human in the presence of God, there's a supernatural promise attached to it. And so as creative people, engaging with the living God who does not reject us in our suffering and actually is impacted by us in our suffering, as artists, it is irresponsible, it's highly irresponsible, knowing the God that we serve, not to engage in, first of all, our own humanity and allow God to invade that. But also, once we know the power of a God who cares deeply about the human experience and has made a way for us to be with him, not to allow that to impact the way that we tell stories. We're not to reject the human experience. Nothing is a distraction from the gospel. No pain is a distraction from the gospel. It's an entry point. And so as storytellers, it's our responsibility to engage in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I feel like there's a whole nother tangent we could go off on as far as authenticity.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking a lot about that. But I do want to round this discussion out. Not that dying to oneself is a negative. I believe we've been talking about how truly positive and I think that's truly the heart of the conversation that have been happening, that it's really been forming in my mind is what does it look like to die to yourself? That is kind of a daily occurrence. I mean, it literally says it in the Bible. To die daily. Such a difficult thing to take hold of and take heart and actually master what that is. But even maybe even just on the other side of that, or after you die, for you personally, I'm curious, like in that realm of dying to yourself and surrendering yourself to the Holy Spirit and have his way out of that place, what is your hope to then now accomplish within your art, within your craft, after that wholeness is then achieved?
I would argue that the moment after dying to yourself is one of the most vulnerable moments, because we still have to wait in the presence of God. And I'm not saying that you don't do anything from that place, but I am saying that understanding that I think that there's an opportunity to, it's a place of great joy. It's a place of weightlessness and freedom. And within that, there's an opportunity to just dream with God and create with God. If you can sort of resist the impulse to determining for yourself what the end result of that time will be. If you can just get to a place of And, if death is too intensive a word, you get to that place of a reset. It's a moment, it's an opportunity to dream with God. Before the world was created, it says it was a formless void, and there was darkness. And then God spoke. And the first way that he chooses to identify himself, and I always say it's the first 5 words: in the beginning, God created. So if you look at sort of daily taking up your cross, daily dying to yourself as an opportunity to be reset by the presence of God, then in the beginning, there's a void and there's darkness and there's the Holy Spirit hovering over that moment. And there's an opportunity to create with a living God. It's both vulnerable, it's fearful, and it's unpredictable, but it is the most authentic place to create from, because you're not creating for something, you're creating from something. Yeah. And you're creating from a place of love, because God resets us so that we remember who we are. We die to ourselves daily to remember. That's why we take communion. We remember the death of Christ so that we can partake in the resurrection power of the living God who walked among us, died among us for us, and filled us with his Spirit. Yeah. It's literally, we have an opportunity to walk out the gospel every day. And if we remember that as creatives, storytelling won't be the point, it will be the result.
Yeah. It's that simple.
That simple.
We just got to go do it now.
Yeah. Just a bow. There you go. Yeah.
Check box. That's all it takes.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
Just knowing that, I think it's just knowing that it's not about, it's challenging, right? Because you can know that and then sit on it. But I think greater than get out and do it is being filled with possibility first. That's what, to me, faith is a moment where God inspires faith. He's also filling you with possibility. So rather than like make a list of all the things you're going to go do now, allow the God of possibility to fill you and to expand that sense of possibility. And that's where faith is a gift. It's the audacity of possibility. And when you are overflowing with possibility, go.
Yeah.
Out
of that place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you're going from a place of overflow, not trying to prove anything for God or for anyone else or to yourself. Don't post that Instagram post if you're wanting likes. Post it because it's overflowing from a place that God deeply inspired you. And that's what I have to remind myself every day as an actor. I feel it. I feel when I am not
striving.
Yeah, I feel it when I'm looking, when I'm trying to get something, as opposed to it just flows out of me. And to be honest, like I'd love for those moments to be more, where it's coming from a place of overflow than a place of taking.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. That's where ditto, man. That's where I'm at. Oh my gosh. Phillip, thank you so much just for sharing your heart, being so vulnerable in sharing your story, your history, that depth of trial and tribulation. I can so wholly identify or just take things from it, glean things from it. So thank you for being so open and willing to talk and share. I feel like we could keep going. We have definitely other tangents that we will definitely do offline and then hopefully spark more. But to sit and wonder and to talk in wonder, and that's a great place to be. So thank you so much for joining us here.
Thanks, man.
It's been awesome, and maybe we'll see you on part 2.
Yeah, man.
So.
Thanks, bro. That wasn't a fart. That was the chair.
Got the cameras. Got the audio. We're out.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the LCJ podcast. We hope that this conversation blessed you. If you want to know more, please look in the description for more links and follow the Expression 58 socials to keep up to date on what we're doing. If you'd like to support the creation of this podcast, please consider donating. visit expression58.org/podcasts for more information. We'll see you next time.